Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Back Saturday, a happy buyers podcast where we break down the real estate market each and every Friday and help home buyers build confidence, follow a process, and hopefully buy really well. I'm your host, Chayse Jones, and joining me as he does every week is real estate tragic Sam Hunter.
Real estate nerd. I always go to mimic you at the end of that opening spiel.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's not going to be pretty one day when I actually just don't consciously stop myself from opening my mouth.
Today we're going to talk auctions because what I'm feeling out in the Brisbane market in particular right now is that we're seeing more auctions than ever.
Yeah, and more nerves around auctions than ever. We did an episode of this to start this podcast, but probably warrants, I think it was our longest episode to date so far, and we're just going to talk about it again, ideally with a few more stories, a bit more context, a bit more detail, hopefully just to give the listeners out there a little bit of confidence around auctions and maybe urge some caution around tactics that can be used, ideally aren't though, during that auction process to try and elicit offers where there may not be others or anything like that. So it's a touchy subject, but an important subject, particularly with the Brisbane market maturing and more property, even for first home buyers, being taken to auction every weekend.
Nice one. Yeah, I like what you said there about the Brisbane market maturing, and that's probably a sign as to why we're seeing more auctions. But can you give a bit more of an explanation as to why agents are more willing to take that approach to the sale campaign now as opposed to maybe even 12 months ago?
It's actually not easier to sell a house by auction.
I was going to say a similar thing. It's certainly not an easier way or an easier campaign.
Let me paraphrase. It is a really transparent, really forthright way of achieving a price for a property where a seller has a decision to make. Do they accept it or do they take it back to the market? It's not necessarily an easy way to sell because it requires the real estate agent to communicate with any number of parties, interested or not, really effectively for 3 or 4 weeks. There's a lot of real estate agents out there, none of whom listen to this show, who just can't be asked doing that. They want to open it on a Saturday and sell it on Tuesday to, whoever they get an offer, whether they ring anyone back or otherwise, it doesn't really matter. The market is doing their job rather than them doing their job. More properties being taken to auction because of the unconditional nature of the result if it does sell, usually at auction or prior to, if there are offers made prior to. And in any market, regardless of whether it's rising, whether it's a buyer's market, a seller's market, anything, certainty is worth something to someone who is selling them. This podcast is all about buying well and following a process, as you said at the start, building confidence. Make no mistake about it, selling a house sucks. If you accept an offer on your property, and anyone who's listening to this who's sold a property will know these emotions and hopefully repress them. You sign, you've seen the price, you're stoked, but then you don't know if it's actually going to happen for 7 days, 14 days. We saw a lawyer contract review the other day that recommended that a buyer should put a 21-day finance and a 21-day building and pest clause on all their contracts. And I was like, man, that lawyer is going to cost these people property because you can do all that in a matter of days, not a matter of weeks. So to be able to get a result and a figure with no conditions attached to it enables a seller to make a decision, and they can have confidence that my house is sold. It gives them the chance to go and buy something as well. It's also, particularly in a market like we're in now where prices are rising. So we're recording this last day of April 2024. Brisbane market's gone up by another % this month, according to the data. So average, I think, dwelling price in Brisbane is $780,000. That's nearly $8,000. Average house price is over $1 million. So that's over $10,000. So if you've been looking for the last 4 weeks, you've had to find 10 grand in your back pocket just to feel comfortable making an offer. Certainly the properties that we've bought in the last 4 weeks, we've not bought them cheap. I don't think we've overpaid for any of them, but we have paid the potentially uncomfortable side of fair for what they are, none of which have been an auction. We would have loved to have gone to auction for these properties because you know where the market is. You know what the other bidder, if there are any, or other bidders are willing to pay, and you can make a decision, do I want to pay more than that or not?
And I think that's something where we may differ to a lot of other buyers out there. I know you spoke about a maturing market, but then also about confidence. And do you think that there are still reservations from buyers, particularly maybe even first home buyers, who I would say that the vast majority of our audience is? Do you think that there's still trepidation around seeing a house with an auction against it? Do you think people are still passing those by and being like, oh, well, that one's not for me? Or do you think there's a sense of maturity to buyers as well, where that's just part of the process now and get used to it?
Not a lot of property across the world, other than in Australia and New Zealand, is sold by auction.
That's interesting.
It is really interesting. There's a lot of art and a lot of fancy, almost very difficult to value commodities or, individual unique things that are sold at auction. Auction used to be really traditionally Sydney and Melbourne thing, and it was the upper quartile, so the millionaires row in Sydney, Melbourne that were auctioned, because there weren't rows and rows of post-war 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom with outhouse sales that had sold for 60,000. Then they all sold for 70, they all sold for 80, then they all sold for 140, they all sold for 250. These were unique homes that you couldn't figure out a price. So it was like, let's just put all the rich people in a room and see what happens. As the market has matured, it's become recognized method of sale, and there's plenty of ways to sell a house, but it's become a recognized method of sale that offers buyer and seller time and transparency. So if you're looking at a property and it's going to auction in 4 weeks, you don't have to make a decision to buy that property that day. You can pull the reins back a little bit and go, do I like it? Do I want to buy it? What do we think it's worth? In Queensland, there's no price guides. That's a whole other episode on its own, which makes things more difficult than it should be for a buyer to get an understanding of price. It's actually illegal for an agent to talk about an auction price with anyone. And there's a little, dodgy thing that agents do where they also tick a box on their instruction agreement or their listing agreement that says we can't even provide comparable sales, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. You shouldn't do that, agents, if you're listening to this.
Untick that box.
So when we say the market's matured, it just means that it's become a more comfortable method of sale. And it translated from rich people auctioning their houses in Sydney and Melbourne to everyone pretty much auctioning their houses in Sydney and Melbourne. And in the last 5 years, a lot of people have adopted auction as their preferred method of sale here in Brisbane, because it does give an adequate amount of time on market to uncover all the buyers, not just the ones that could have made it to the first open home at 10 a.m. So you weren't worried that someone missed it because of kids' sport or whatever it is. And then they were in a position where they may have determined what it was worth to them, and they rock up on the day or they rock up on the night if it's in rooms, and someone else might want to pay more, someone else want to pay less. It's a really fair and transparent way of seeing the market, rather than something like a best and final situation, which a lot of people walk away from feeling a bit icky.
Definitely a gross feeling sometimes with best and finals, with that lack of transparency. Lucky us now, we're all the rich Sydney-siders in the room. So
something like that, yeah.
I think the reason why we probably have a bit more of a positive outlook on auctions is down to preparation. It's because we are having all of the hard conversations, the important strategic conversations well ahead of the big day. We're not having a rushed conversation the morning of. We're certainly not having conversations or even side glances on the day. Can you speak to probably the steps that we take in the days leading up to an auction, which put us in a better position than most other buyers?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, auctions exist to create sometimes warranted, sometimes a false sense of urgency, competition, scarcity. The less prepared you are, the more overwhelming those things will be. Absolutely. And that's where you can walk away from there being like, I'd never paid that. When in reality, potentially you would have. You just didn't have the organization and those crucial, often courageous conversations up front. So when we're preparing our clients for auction, if we've decided, well, one, if we've been informed that there's no offers being made prior, and we're fans of that just to kind of test the waters. You never go on with your max, but you go on with something that's relatively compelling with auction terms and conditions. So it is an unconditional offer. We are waiving our cooling off period. We've put down a price that is the higher side of fair, but maybe isn't our absolute max. And you see how willing the sellers are to sell or not. If you get that far and you go into auction, we will always have 2 meetings with our clients the week leading up to the auction, and we would urge any buyers to grab half a bottle of wine. Don't have the whole bottle of wine because your price might change after the second.
Clarity.
Exactly. And sit down and kind of run almost a false auction for yourself, just and work out what your pricing look like. Like I guess language that we really like is we'd rather be uncomfortable on the Tuesday before the auction than during it.
100%.
And we've had meetings where we have 2, call it pre-auction strategy meetings. The first one is just about price, and that is at what point are you so uncomfortable that someone else can buy this property?
Literally down to the dollar.
Down to the dollar. And it is a case of, we always, like the first question any buyer has to ask themselves when they're thinking about bidding at an auction or making an offer is, do I want to buy the house? If the answer to that question is yes, then it's at what price, and this is the best and final, and we can talk about that in another episode, or at an auction, at what price am I willing to let someone else have it? Where they can buy it and I'll walk away and I'm stoked. I'm like, you know what? Wasn't a house for me. They literally did pay more than I was willing to pay. Not to say that they paid too much. They paid more than you were willing to pay.
If you're not provided with comparable sales, which we just spoke about just prior, do your research as well. Give yourself a foundation in which to base these opinions on price about, because you'll want to determine what fair market value is. Now, in the rising market, there's every chance you're going to have to pay a premium on top of that, particularly in an auction format. But that then speaks to this next price, the oh shit price.
Yeah. So we always work on 3 prices. We've labeled them Hawaii price, fair market value, and oh shit. The Hawaii price, we're going to put in the explicit warning on this podcast now. We got free reign to swear all the time now that we've said shit. Hawaii price is effectively, you feel like you've stolen the property, you've got money in the bank to go on family holiday to Hawaii during the settlement period. There's no houses in today's market that are being sold for a Hawaii price unless there is some significant objections to that home. And I would urge you to find out what they are and make a very intelligent decision about whether actually that's an asset that you want to buy. Fair market value, the way we describe fair market value is if you're looking at comparables from a month ago, and I probably wouldn't look beyond that because the market is moving so significantly. If you would be willing to pay between 1% and 5% more than the nearest comparable from up to a month ago, that's fair market value with a premium attached to it because the market is moving. There is competition for every good home in the market right now. And there is oh shit. And that is the price that at auction day, when somebody else buys the home, you turn to your buying partner and you say, shit, I would have paid that. But you didn't because potentially you hadn't had that conversation. And maybe there was a moment in the auction that you did stall and you guys weren't clear on what that number was.
The conversation needs to go like this. If I asked you what that price was going to be in a pre-auction strategy meeting and you told me that that price was $1,100,000, if I then asked you if someone bought it for $1,101, would you be devastated?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's $1,000.
Yeah,
2,000,
exactly.
and you get to a point where you both agree. You're just like, we're out.
And then we ask one more time.
Yeah, for
or
sure.
Two more times. What if it was another $1,000 on top of that? It's meant to be uncomfortable. We never leave those meetings being the good guys. Thankfully, we have a lot of them face to face where we can hug at the end of it. But the idea is that we are there to be uncomfortable before time.
Yeah. If you've answered the question of do you want to buy the house, then you've got to put yourself in the best position possible to win that auction. And until you know that price, bidding strategy, anything like that doesn't come into it because you've got to know what you're comfortable paying and what you're comfortable losing the property for. Somebody else can have it at that price. It is meant to feel like an argument.
Yeah.
Right. And it is better to have that earlier than it is to have it on the day. We talk about this show about calculator couples, right? Every auction we go to, there's somebody who pulls their phone out, opens the calculator app and runs their numbers. They never buy the property.
See ya.
So have those conversations early. Agree what that oh shit price is and stick to it. Like we walk into auctions with that number written down on a piece of paper, literally in our pocket. There's no questions asked. We don't go past it. It's as simple as that because we've prepared and we've had this conversation over and over and over again to get to that number way before the day.
And we are prepared in more ways than just that price. We're all there as a team. We've got one of us with the paddle and everyone else is stoic. Other things to do ahead of time is register early.
100%.
I think that's a really important just admin task that does take, again, the pressure off the big day itself. You register ahead of time. And also there's some other logistical things that you need to talk through regarding settlement times, regarding deposit amounts. There'll be stuff on the contract which you'll need to read through. Sometimes that can be 10% of the purchase price. If you're not in a position to pay that, you need to get a request to vary that on the contract ahead of time. And these are all things that can be done in the week leading up to, in between that meeting, the pricing meeting and the strategy meeting, which we'll get to.
Your point about variances to contract terms, I think it's really important to go through that. And this is particularly aimed at first-time buyers who are listening to this, a lot of first-time buyers will see 10% or 5% on their contract and be like, I don't have that in cash.
I'm out.
I can't bid.
You're not out.
You are not out. Call the real estate agent, say, I just need a variation to that. This is what my deposit is. They're not going to say no. They don't want to lose a bidder. If you need 35 days instead of 30 days, if you need 40 days instead of 30 days, they're not going to lose potentially a higher price for that unless there are some specific circumstances related to settlement days and things like that. But always ask the question. Don't assume that because those numbers are written there and you can't perform to them that you cannot bid at auction.
Yeah, okay. We've spoken about price. We've registered early. We have looked at the contract. We reviewed it and everything is as per what we can action if we're successful in buying the property. Another really important one. Who's holding the paddle?
Yeah, that's the thing. One person bids and you guys, that is the way that it works. So one person bids, you sit there and you kind of don't even make eye contact with each other. You're just there scoping out of the bidders and whoever's in control of that paddle is bidding confidently, quickly, not necessarily aggressively, but directly to that oh shit price. And if you buy it for that price or less, everybody wins. If you don't, it wasn't meant to be.
And speaking of calculator couple, the reason why we bring that up is because in the theatre of auction, where there's a room full of people, you're all performing. And that includes everybody that you're there with as well. If there's 4 people, it might be, for example, myself and Sam and a couple that's purchasing. It's on the other 3 people in that room if Sam's holding that paddle to not give anything away because there are all eyes on you. If you are participating, eyes are darting around the room and we're the ones doing the darting with our eyes as well because we want to strategically bid as much as we want to keep our cards close to our chest.
For sure. And I think like it's hard to talk about bidding strategy at a desk with a neon light next to us, right? It's once you've been to enough auctions, and I'm going to give away my tip of the week here early, I think. But once you've been to enough auctions,
cue the song.
You get a feel. You get a feel for how they play out, how types of individuals or couples will tend to bid. And so I would suggest like go and have a look at a few first. That is tip of the week. We'll go over that officially at the end. But when you get to an auction and you have the intention to bid, get there early, introduce yourself to the auctioneer, make it known to the agent that you're there to buy the home and you're really hoping for a positive result. And then when that crowd gathers, whether it's in the back garden, on the back deck, front lawn, whether it's in rooms, make sure you're in the front row, but don't necessarily be front and center. We like being, and again, if you can imagine the auctioneer standing in the middle of the room, there's like this invisible force field of a semicircle around them where everyone will stand like 10 meters away from the auctioneer. Just be in the front row of the people, but be to one side, because that means when you are scoping out the crowd, you don't have to zigzag your head back and forth. You're just looking and you can see where everyone is and you can position yourself and you can learn to read confidence. You can learn to read body language. You can understand who's having those conversations mid-auction instead of the people who are actually prepared. And then you'll start to understand, okay, cool, this is the right time to make a bigger bid, or this is the right time to just go back hard and fast, or this is the right time to actually sit back, let somebody else make the first bid, see where we land so we can understand how close or how far away we are from our fair market value price, from our ship price, and that will inform the rest of that. Coming back to where we started this conversation, the first meeting we have with our clients, and this is what we would talk about as well, is all about price and agreeing that price and making sure we're firm on it. Second meeting that we have, which is usually the day before the auction, is all about bidding strategy. So it's who's going to do the bidding, where are we going to stand, who's the auctioneer, what do we know about them, what do we know about the agent, have we been to their auctions in the past, how do they usually go, what price bracket are we buying in, what can we expect to see from the crowd, and then we run through numbers, less than 4 bidders, 4 to 8, 8 plus, how we usually play those auctions, what's going to happen from there. And it's the same thing for you guys. Go and see as many auctions as you possibly can, even if the houses aren't the ones that you want to buy. Get a feel for the theatre, as you said. Get a feel for that atmosphere. Start understanding what a confident bid looks like. Where did the buyer start? Were they actually the first bid? Because every real estate agent under the sun will tell you the first bid buys the house, and that is like categorically not true. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
That's to feed the theatre.
Most of the time, if it does sell under auction, the last bid buys the house.
Oh,
so that's probably where it's more important to be.
But find out on when you are going to auctions, even if you're not participating, how many bidders there are, or count paddles, whatever it may be, because that's worth taking note of. We were talking last week about creating notes about properties. Do the same for the auctions that you attend. There were 6 people that were bidding in that auction, 4 of which actually put forward bids. This is how it went. This was the knockout blow. Learn something from them. If you see someone have a win, wouldn't you want to do something similar if you want to win on the right date for yourself? Another thing speaking to before about the auctioneer and introducing yourself to the auctioneer. Always keeping in mind that there's nothing adversarial between yourself as a bidder and the auctioneer and the agent. At some point in time, you may need their favor. And being kind, being polite, introducing yourself, being on a first name basis with them, they will look to you. They will almost want you to get a great result. Don't treat them as if they're the ones like standing in between you and the property. That's the other bidders. They're the adversary. Okay, so keep that in mind at all times.
Very good.
All right, what's your tip? Give us the wrap up on that tip of the week for buyers buying at auction.
Go to a few auctions this weekend. Ideally, they're going to be in and around the area that you feel like you want to buy in. Ideally, they're going to be in a similar price range to where you might want to buy, but it probably just may not have been the house for you. But go and just listen to this episode while you're driving there in the car. Hopefully it's only 20 minutes, and go and see what matches up. Like, understand, you made a really good point there of like, see how the winning bidder bid. Did they use a knockout bid? Sometimes people are trying to save money at an auction instead of knock the other bidders out, and going back and forth in $1,000 or $5,000 increments just gives the auction momentum. Sometimes if it's going like that and you can go up by $10 or $15 or $20,000, you will actually save money in the long term, because everyone else will be like, whoa, that was unexpected. And the shock and awe is what it takes to get them out. You don't know whether that's something you want to do. You don't know whether that's something you're confident in doing until you've seen it in real life. You need to do more than just listen to this podcast 3 or 4 times before you go on an auction.
Awesome, but please do it. We need the play count.
100%.
Absolutely, guys. Be prepared, bid confidently, buy well. Hey, Sam. I'm Chase. Cue the song.